Hey there, welcome back to Timeless Wisdom. Did you realize that by the time most Americans hit 60, they've gathered over 300,000 items in their homes? But these aren't just random things. They're a rich collection of memories, life stories, and decisions made over the years. The catch: most decluttering advice you see today is aimed at younger folks in their 30s who haven't faced the challenge of sorting through 4 decades of meaningful belongings. Today, I want to share with you the 8 biggest decluttering myths that many seniors have been fed, and how one couple, Patricia and James, turned their retirement around by throwing those myths out the window. Their approach is so effective, even their grown children ask them for tips on organizing. Stay tuned, especially for tip number 5. It shifted my entire mindset about what's worth holding on to and what's time to release. Meet Patricia and James. Both are 68 and they spent their careers as a nurse and a high school principal. After more than 40 years of working hard, they now live in a beautiful 4-bedroom house packed with family treasures. Heirlooms passed down, kids' artwork, awards from their careers, souvenirs from trips, and countless photographs that tell their story. Our home wasn't just cluttered, Patricia explains, it was overwhelmed with memories. When their grandson developed asthma and couldn't visit because of the dust, they knew something had to change. They tried following popular decluttering methods but felt guilty, overwhelmed, and even more stressed. Most advice made us feel like we were doing something wrong by valuing our possessions. James says we weren't hoarders. We were simply people who'd lived full lives. That's when they discovered a different approach, one specifically designed for their generation. Within 6 months, they had transformed their home without sacrificing what mattered most. Their house became a place of peace rather than chaos, welcoming rather than overwhelming. Today, I'm sharing the 8 decluttering lies that had been holding Patricia and James back, and the truthful alternatives that finally worked for them. Their story might just change your relationship with your home forever. Before we dive in, have you ever felt overwhelmed by traditional decluttering advice? Has someone ever made you feel guilty about keeping items that are meaningful to you? Share your experience in the comments below. Lie number 1. If you haven't used it in a year, throw it out. This is perhaps the most pervasive and damaging decluttering myth for those of us over 60. Patricia recalls how this advice made her nearly discard her mother's hand-stitched quilt, an irreplaceable family heirloom she hadn't used in years, but that carried generations of history. The truth: the 1-year rule was created for consumable goods and trendy items, not for meaningful possessions that connect us to our past. After decades of living, we've collected items that serve purposes beyond utility. They're touchstones to our personal history. Here's a better approach. Instead of asking, "When did I last use this?" ask, "What role does this serve in my life story?" Some items are utilitarian, meant to be used regularly. Others are memorial, connecting us to loved ones or important moments. Still others are legacy items meant to be passed down. Patricia and James created 3 simple categories: utility items, things used regularly for practical purposes; memory anchors, items that connect to important people, achievements, or moments; legacy treasures, possessions meant to be passed to specific people. Once we recognize that different items serve different purposes in our lives, the pressure to discard based on frequency of use disappeared. Patricia explains, "My mother's quilt became a properly stored legacy treasure for our granddaughter, not something to feel guilty about keeping." The science: research from the Journal of Gerontology shows that meaningful possessions serve as identity anchors for seniors, providing continuity of self during major life transitions like retirement. These objects aren't clutter, they're part of your identity narrative. Practical tip: create a memory anchor box for each decade of your life. Limit it to one reasonably sized container and allow yourself to keep items that transport you back to those times without justification. For legacy treasures, add a note explaining their significance and who they're intended for. Have you ever regretted discarding something meaningful because of the 1-year rule? Share your experience in the comments below. And stay tuned, because line number 2 might explain why traditional decluttering methods have left you feeling drained rather than relieved. Line number 2. Decluttering should be done quickly and aggressively. Patricia remembers watching popular decluttering shows where entire homes were transformed in a weekend. When she and James tried this approach, they ended up exhausted, overwhelmed, and with decision fatigue so severe they couldn't continue. The truth? After over 60 years of acquiring possessions, expecting to sort through them in days is not just unrealistic, it's physically and emotionally harmful. Quick decluttering leads to regrettable decisions and burnout. We were trying to sort through 45 years of marriage in a single weekend, James recalls. By Sunday evening, we were making arbitrary decisions just to finish, and we were both physically exhausted and emotionally drained. Here's what actually works. The 5-5-5 method that Patricia and James developed. 5 minutes of decluttering, 5 items per session, and 5 sessions per week. This gentle, sustainable approach acknowledges both the physical limitations that can come with age and the emotional weight of sorting through a lifetime of possessions. It turns decluttering from an overwhelming project into a manageable practice. The 5-5-5 method changed everything. Patricia says, "Suddenly, we weren't racing against time. We could thoughtfully consider each item, and most importantly, we weren't exhausted. We actually looked forward to our decluttering sessions because they were achievable." The science. Cognitive research shows that decision-making is a limited resource that depletes with use. Older adults experience decision fatigue more quickly when faced with emotional choices. Micro-sessions preserve mental energy for quality decisions. Practical tip. Create a decluttering station in your home, a comfortable chair, good lighting, a sorting box, and perhaps some tea or coffee. Make this a pleasant ritual rather than a dreaded chore. Use a timer to stick to 5 minutes and celebrate each completed session. Have you ever felt exhausted from trying to declutter too quickly? Has the marathon weekend approach worked for you or left you feeling worse? Share your thoughts in the comments. Line number 3. Minimalism is the goal for everyone. James was particularly affected by this myth. As a former high school principal, he'd collected hundreds of books, student letters, teaching awards, and memorabilia that told the story of his 40-year career. When he tried to embrace minimalism, he felt like he was erasing his life's work. The truth, minimalism is a personal aesthetic choice, not a moral virtue. It works beautifully for some people, but for many over 60, a curated abundance is more appropriate and fulfilling. The goal should be creating a home that supports your current lifestyle while honoring your journey. I tried to become a minimalist because that's what all the experts recommended, James explains. I got rid of books I'd treasured only to rebuy some of them later. I felt like I was trying to erase my past to fit someone else's ideal. Here's what actually works. Purposeful curation, keeping items that serve either a current function or a meaningful connection, but displaying and organizing them intentionally. Music. For James, this meant creating a dedicated home library with his most treasured books, displaying select teaching awards, and organizing student letters in beautiful albums that could be enjoyed rather than hidden away. He let go of duplicate books and paperwork that no longer served a purpose, but honored the items that told his story. Now visitors see our home and understand who we are, Patricia says. It's not sparse, but everything has a place and purpose. Our home tells our story without overwhelming us. The science, environmental psychology studies show that our homes reflect and reinforce our identities. For those with rich, long lives, a certain amount of meaningful objects provides psychological comfort and reinforces self-continuity. Practical tip: instead of trying to minimize, focus on showcasing what matters. Create legacy displays, shadow boxes, photo walls, or dedicated shelves that highlight meaningful collections. Rotate seasonal or theme displays to enjoy more of your treasures without cluttering every surface. Has the pressure to become minimalist ever made you feel like you're erasing your history? Or have you found a balance between minimalism and honoring your past? Share your thoughts below. Lie number 4. You shouldn't keep things for sentimental reasons. This was the lie that brought Patricia to tears during their decluttering journey. After losing her sister to cancer, certain items, her sister's scarf, handwritten recipes, and even seemingly ordinary objects they'd purchased together, became precious connections to her memory. The truth: sentimental value is real value, especially as we age. Research shows that meaningful objects can provide comfort, preserve family narratives, and help process grief. The key isn't eliminating sentimental items, it's curating them intentionally. A popular decluttering expert told me that keeping my sister's things wouldn't bring her back, Patricia remembers. But that completely missed the point. These items weren't about denying death. They were about celebrating the relationship we had. Here's what actually works: the Heart Connection Inventory, a deliberate process of identifying, documenting, and properly preserving truly meaningful sentimental items. Patricia selected the most meaningful items that connected her to her sister, photographed each one, and wrote down the specific memory attached to it. Some items, like the handwritten recipes, were framed and displayed in her kitchen. Others were carefully stored in a special memory box. The key was being selective, but honoring these connections rather than dismissing them. Now, when I see her recipe for lemon bars framed in my kitchen, I smile instead of crying. Patricia says, "It's not clutter. It's a daily connection to someone I love." The science. Therapeutic research shows that physical objects can serve as transitional objects that help us maintain connections to those we've lost. For seniors who've experienced multiple losses, these items provide emotional continuity and comfort. Practical tip: create memory vessels, beautiful boxes or albums designated for specific people or periods in your life. Limit yourself to what fits in the vessel, but don't feel guilty about keeping what truly connects you to loved ones. Add notes explaining the significance for future generations. Have you been made to feel guilty for keeping sentimental items? How do you balance honoring memories while preventing clutter? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Music. Lie number 5. Your children want your heirlooms and collections. This revelation was perhaps the most difficult for both Patricia and James to accept. They had been carefully preserving china sets, stamp collections, antique furniture, and family heirlooms with the assumption their children would treasure these items as much as they did. The truth is, generational preferences have shifted dramatically. Most millennials and Gen X children prefer experiences over possessions and have different aesthetic preferences. Keeping items solely to pass down often creates future burden rather than preserving legacy. When we finally had an honest conversation with our children about what they actually wanted, we were shocked, James admits. The antique dining set we'd been preserving for our daughter. She confessed she had nowhere to put it and preferred modern furniture. But she did want the family recipes and photo albums. Here's what actually works: the legacy conversation, a direct, pressure-free discussion with family members about what items hold meaning for them, followed by documenting the stories behind important pieces. Patricia and James invited their children over separately and asked them to walk through the house and note items they genuinely connected with. They were surprised to discover their son valued James's vintage record collection, but not the valuable coins his grandfather had left him. Their daughter wanted Patricia's handwritten recipe cards, but not her fine china. Once we knew what they truly valued, we could make better decisions about everything else, Patricia explains. It was liberating to realize we didn't need to preserve things no one actually wanted. The science, intergenerational studies show that while physical objects matter less to younger generations, the stories and history behind them remain deeply important. Documenting the narrative can preserve legacy even when the objects themselves aren't kept. Practical tip: create digital or written records of your most treasured items. Histories, who made them, how they were acquired, historical context, and why they matter to you. This provenance journal preserves the legacy even if the physical items eventually find new homes. Were you surprised to discover which items your children or grandchildren actually wanted? Have you had this conversation yet? Share your experience in the comments section below. Lie number 6. You just need better storage solutions. James laughs now about their container phase when they believed the answer to their clutter problems was simply buying more sophisticated storage systems. Our basement was filled with empty storage containers while the actual clutter remained upstairs. We were storing our storage. The truth is, for those of us over 60 who've spent decades accumulating possessions, no amount of storage can solve the fundamental issue of having too many items. Storage often hides the problem rather than solving it, and can actually enable continued accumulation. We spent hundreds on beautiful containers, specialized hangers, and shelf systems, Patricia remembers. But all we accomplished was organizing our clutter rather than addressing it. Plus, many of those systems required bending, reaching, or climbing that became physically challenging. Here's what actually works: the one-in, two-out system combined with the prime real estate principle. Patricia and James established a rule for anything new that entered their home. 2 similar items had to leave. Additionally, they identified the prime real estate in their home, spaces that were easily accessible without bending or reaching, and reserved these areas exclusively for items used weekly. This approach forced us to make intentional decisions about what deserved our accessible spaces, James explains. Suddenly, we were evaluating new purchases not just on whether we liked them, but whether they were worth displacing existing items. The science. Accessibility studies show that as we age, our functional living space naturally shrinks to areas that are comfortably reachable. Items stored in difficult-to-access locations often become effectively unusable, regardless of their value. Practical tip: map your home's accessibility zones, categorizing spaces by how easily you can reach them without strain. Reserve easy access areas for frequently used items, and be extremely selective about what deserves this prime real estate. For collections or seasonal items, consider rotating displays rather than trying to show everything at once. Have you fallen into the trap of buying organizing products without actually reducing clutter? Did those solutions work for you or just hide the problem? I'm curious about your experiences, so please share in the comments. Lie number 7. Everything should have a practical purpose. This myth particularly affected Patricia's approach to her extensive craft supplies. Having been an avid quilter and knitter throughout her life, she had accumulated fabrics, yarns, and tools, many of which hadn't been used recently as arthritis had limited her abilities. The truth: as we age, our relationship with hobbies and creativity evolves. But that doesn't diminish the value of creative possessions. Items that connect us to our sense of capability, possibility, and identity serve crucial psychological purposes beyond practical use. I was told to donate all my quilting supplies since I hadn't completed a quilt in over 2 years, Patricia shares. But sitting with my fabrics, planning projects, and even just organizing my collections brought me joy. Getting rid of them felt like admitting I would never create again. Here's what actually works. The creative capacity shift. Acknowledging changes in abilities while finding new ways to engage with lifelong passions and their associated possessions. Instead of abandoning her quilting entirely, Patricia created a more accessible creative space with her favorite fabrics and tools. She began making smaller projects that worked within her physical capabilities and invited her granddaughter over for crafting sessions where she could share her knowledge. I kept what inspired me and what I could realistically use, but let go of the expectation of creating the same way I used to, she explains. Now, my supplies aren't a reminder of what I can't do, but an invitation to what I still can. The science. Occupational therapy research shows that maintaining connections to lifelong skills and interests supports cognitive health and emotional well-being in seniors, even when those activities must be modified. Creative identity remains important throughout life. Practical tip for hobby supplies and creative tools. Create a possibility space rather than focusing solely on current output. Keep materials that still inspire you, but be realistic about physical limitations. Consider how you might adapt hobbies or share them across generations when direct participation becomes challenging. Have you struggled with letting go of hobby supplies or tools as your capabilities have changed? How have you adapted your creative pursuits over time? Share your wisdom in the comments below. Lie number 8. Decluttering works the same at every age. This was the fundamental realization that transformed Patricia and James's entire approach. After multiple failed attempts following one-size-fits-all methods, they recognized that decluttering after decades of accumulation requires an entirely different framework. The truth? Decluttering in your 60s, 70s and beyond isn't simply about creating an Instagram-worthy home or the latest organizing trend. It's about life review, legacy creation, and preparing both your physical space. Every popular decluttering book or show seemed to be created by or for someone in their 30s or 40s. James observes they completely miss the emotional and practical realities of sorting through a lifetime's accumulation and the physical challenges that often come with age. Here's what actually works. The life season approach, recognizing that decluttering in your senior years is about honoring your past while creating space for your current season of life. Patricia and James developed a system that viewed decluttering not as elimination, but as curation. They focused first on safety and accessibility, ensuring their home supported their changing physical needs. Then they addressed the narrative quality of their possessions, how their home told their story, and what legacy they wanted to leave. We stopped trying to erase evidence of our long lives, Patricia says. Instead, we became curators of our own history, keeping what best represented each chapter and what served us in the present. The science. Developmental psychology identifies life review as a crucial task in our later years. Thoughtful engagement with possessions can support this process, helping integrate life experiences while adapting to current circumstances. Practical tip. Approach decluttering as creating a life museum. What exhibits from each period of your life best represent who you were and who you've become? What deserves prominence and what can be documented and released? Consider creating memory books that preserve the stories of items before letting the physical objects go. Has traditional decluttering advice felt disconnected from your actual needs and circumstances? What approaches have worked better for you? Share your insights in the comments section below. 18 months after rejecting these 8 decluttering lies, Patricia and James's home and lives have been transformed, but not in the way most decluttering shows would portray. Their home isn't minimalist. It's not a showplace of perfect organization systems. Instead, it's become a comfortable, accessible space that tells their story while supporting their current needs. We can find what we need when we need it, James says. Our grandchildren can visit without their allergies acting up. But most importantly, we're no longer stressed by our possessions or guilty about what we've kept. Patricia adds, "The breathing room we've created isn't just physical, it's emotional. By being intentional about what remains, each item brings joy rather than obligation." The unexpected benefit came in their relationships. By having difficult but honest conversations about heirlooms and legacy items, they strengthened connections with their children. By documenting the stories behind meaningful objects, they preserved family history in a way that resonated across generations. "Our daughter recently told us something that made all the effort worthwhile," Patricia shares with emotion in her voice. She said that for the first time, she wasn't anxious about eventually dealing with our home. She knew the stories that mattered, understood what items were important, and wouldn't be overwhelmed by decades of accumulation. This is perhaps the greatest gift of thoughtful decluttering in our senior years. Peace of mind, not just for ourselves, but for those we love. If you've recognized yourself in Patricia and James's story, remember that decluttering after 60 isn't about following someone else's rules. It's about creating a home that honors your past while supporting your present. Which of these decluttering lies has impacted you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insight might be exactly what another community member needs to hear. If you found today's video helpful and inspiring, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with friends or family members who might be facing their own decluttering challenges. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective to make a big difference in how we manage the belongings that shape our lives. Don't forget to subscribe to Timeless Wisdom, your go-to channel for thoughtful content crafted specifically for our generation. Here we explore topics that matter most to those of us navigating life's unique stages, from managing possessions and simplifying our spaces to embracing new opportunities with confidence and clarity. By joining our community, you'll gain access to practical tips, inspiring stories, and expert insights designed to help you live a more intentional, joyful, and balanced life. So hit that subscribe button and stay connected with Timeless Wisdom, because your journey deserves support that truly understands you.